Quite difficult to find. Certainly Canary Wharf is in the outpost, but I think some of find it quite difficult to find content elsewhere. So thanks for making the effort to come here. My name is Jez Green. I was one of the co-founders of the Behavioural Sciences practice here at Ogilvy with Rory, which is Ogilvy Change. And as part of Ogilvy Change, we rely on quite a lot of academic gravitas, and we've created our own big thinking panel. We're very privileged tonight to have Nathalie Nahai, the web psychologist, who's from that panel, and she sits with people, professors from the LSE, professors from Warwick Business School, and doctors that work with the Cabinet Office. So a very, very prestigious company, and I'm very proud to have Nathalie working with us at the moment. I met Nathalie about 9 months ago. She introduced herself as a web psychologist. I signed her up straight away and said, would you join our panel? So I was really, really enthused and intrigued to know what that meant. She said, all will be revealed because I'm writing a book. We've had many conversations since then, and obviously some of you know Nathalie and have seen her speak before. And we're very, very privileged tonight to be at the book launch. And so the order of this evening would be, we're going to start off the evening with a conversation between Rory and Nathalie about the book. So if you're not familiar, this is Rory Sutherland, who's the Vice Chairman of Ogilvy Group in the UK, and a behavioural economics impresario.
Brian Epstein of behavioural economics.
And Nathalie, I'm sure you're very familiar with. We'll do that for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll open up to more of a panel discussion, which Nathalie will then chair, and then we'll then offer up for discussion and questions from the floor. We've only got water and I think food, we've got some alcoholic drinks, but after that we have got a big bar tab and canapes over at Boysdale's, which is a bar literally around the corner, and we will escort you there because it's a little bit difficult to find. So we should finish up here at most probably about 7:30 we think, and then we'll go for drinks for about an hour. So without further ado, over to Rory and Nathalie.
Of course, thank you very much indeed. My little introduction is very simple, which is that anybody who watches Mad Men or is familiar with the ad world of the 1960s and some extent early 70s, or with the work of Bernbach and Ogilvy, knows that back then there was extraordinary fascination with psychology, and that businesses saw better psychological insight into both specific groups of people, but also what Bernbach called the unchanging man, as one of the major sources of competitive advantage. And both Ogilvy and Bernbach really will want to be social scientists. If I was just down in Tufu, where David lived in his last years, and the library there is packed full of books around this kind of subject of that, of that era. And for whatever reason, slightly mysteriously, and partly I think it was defensive. I think films such as The Manchurian Candidate, books such as The Hidden Persuaders, created an absolute paranoia for a short period about what was seen as underhand manipulation. And so defensively, the ad industry declared, completely wrongly, that actually advertising works through absolutely overt rational persuasion in the, quote, clear light of day. And this was basically extremely wrong, by which I mean that, most of our decisions are not necessarily taken consciously, and indeed the way we report the reasoning behind our decisions is probably a post-rationalization after the fact. But it didn't really matter, because an ad agency made money effectively making TV commercials for a long period. We had nothing like the web in terms of contextual potency, or we had no control over the choice architecture within which people chose, because that was on the supermarket shelf. All those things were outside our control. So as long as, broadly speaking, everybody in the marketing business believed that, and this is still true, that broadly speaking, the more famous you are, the more trusted you are, and the more famous you are, the easier it is to sell, then it didn't really matter. We didn't need to actually convince anyone of anything else. And suddenly, of course, the whole world has flipped, and then actually to a great extent in areas like user experience and behavioural design, choice design, increasingly, of course, in sort of government and behaviour change, social marketing work. Real behavioural change right down to the moment has become a much, much hotter topic, and not before time. I mean, personally, I think every single ad brief, every marketing brief should be written with a behavioural objective. I think if you write with an attitudinal sort of proxy objective, I don't think you're really getting down to the nub of the matter at all. And so we've increasingly become fascinated with what we see as actually a return to what advertising used to do, which is genuinely at least attempting a theory of how humans act, behave, and choose, and what the influences are. online. And interestingly, there's another big reason why this is vastly more important. And I didn't realise this until 2 days ago. I was reading a book by Michael Shermer called The Mind of the Market, which I can also recommend, by the way. And in it he quotes this point of Darwin's, which is that data and information, which we're suddenly awash with, we have behavioural data coming out of our ears in terms of what people do on websites, when they buy, when they don't, when they suddenly stop looking, when they go off somewhere else and then come back. We have all this information. And the point Darwin made was that unless you have a theory, data's no good. Because unless you have some basic foundation theory which the data either strengthens, causes you to modify, or rejects, you can't really work with it. You just get effectively all noise and no signal. And so we increasingly need a theory, a kind of mental, what I call mental mug tree, from which to hang our findings and to arrange our findings, if we're to make sense of this great stream of data that is suddenly starting to appear. It's particularly important we have a psychological theory for this, because if you don't, what happens is the accountants seize control of the data. They impose their own ludicrous neoclassical economic Newtonian model on what's happening, and they extrapolate from it things which really are dangerously wrong or oversimplistic or mechanistic. So it's absolutely vital that whatever the theory is to which we append this data, that it's based on the complex system of human psychology, not on the kind of fake Newtonian representation of I don't know if anyone saw my letter in The Economist, ranting on about how they claimed it was completely irrational that people prefer 50% extra 3 to 33% off the price, even though they claim they're the same. Now, it's only really if you're an economist that you think they're the same, because present within those two things are very different signals. One of them is a mark of generosity and abundance, and the other one is a mark of, I can't sell this thing at full price. Okay? One of them is actually a mark of a bribe and a compromise, whereas the other one signals something completely different. I then ended up by pointing out in any case, which I don't think the economist like, if the entire purpose of life was to be rational, we would have banned golf years ago. Which is also a perfectly fair point. But, it's not unreasonable to allow psychological cues to influence our decision making, because that's where our happiness ultimately comes from, after all. You don't derive much fun from just reading your car's miles per gallon figures and calculating, how much you've saved. Most of us aren't like that, although I suspect some are. So it's incredibly incredibly worthwhile and so valuable to have Nathalie here, because as the web psychologist, she's positioned herself brilliantly. Follow her, first of all. I'm going to do this at the beginning, because I suddenly realised that everybody always gives their Twitter address at the end of a talk, when everybody's standing up and can't actually follow anybody. So at website.
At the website.
At the website. It's up there now. And also www.thewebpsychologist.com are the two sites to look at. But this is incredibly welcome, because it takes an incredibly broad take, actually, if I may say so, brilliantly so, on everything from what you might call reputation theory to behavioral economics, obviously, to neuroscience, and applies it to a very clear and actionable area, which is what, human behaviour online specifically. So it's beautifully and healthily broad in its influences, but then very, very practical in the area it suggests we apply. So I'll start off, I've talked long enough. So first of all, we'll start with the easy one, free will or determinism. To what extent do we actually know what we're doing and why, and to what extent is actually our why a post-rationalisation after the fact?
Right. Well, I think in general, we're quite unaware of what we're doing and why, and the online environment is no different. I think the difference online versus offline is that offline we have structures that we adhere to inform our decisions, so whether that's peer groups or types of magazines that we use, there's always been this kind of, you have a hierarchy about what you can trust and what you can't. Online, especially the early days when it was a much more of a flat architecture, so you could get resources from all over the place, it's very difficult to establish any sort of hierarchy, so the filtration becomes a lot harder. So I think when we make choices online, a lot of the times we end up resorting to the whole thing with choice paralysis, to those principles which we employ subconsciously in an offline environment, so heuristics of authority, so who do we know well, who can we trust to follow their tweets to get a sense that they're credible, or with the ratings on Amazon, you're 20% more likely to go for an object that's been rated than an identical non-rated object. So we still apply those same principles offline. I don't know the extent to which we're aware of them. I think that's probably why things like we'll be changing behaviour economics and harmony are starting to gain traction amongst the early adopters, because we can see the value of having some context for how we make decisions.
We always quote the nice guys, by the way, like Daniel Kahneman and so forth. We always forget that there was a great marketer who said that the most effective form of advertising is when you don't, the most effective form of persuasion is when you're not aware you're being persuaded. Unfortunately, that was Dr. Goebbels' side. You know, we tend not to quote that quite so often, but Daniel Kahneman gives us a marvellous, friendly appearance in that. Interestingly, I was looking at one of the things I've noticed, you mentioned choice architecture and choice paralysis.
Yeah.
One of the things that's very interesting is Amazon, broadly speaking, doesn't do anything except for a good tested reason. And one of the most interesting things I've noticed is that Amazon makes it increasingly difficult. If you type toaster into Amazon, it will bring you a choice of something like 12, is it 10 toasters by default? Now, it will make it incredibly difficult for you to find page 2. In fact, there are 15 pages of toasters on Amazon. But actually, you have to dig down into the page to actually find more than the first 12. And that's presumably to discourage you from looking at too many toasters, because at that point, if you've looked at 26, the likelihood is you actually don't buy at all. Yeah. So that's an interesting case where you would think neoclassical economics says basically the more choice we have, the more we can maximise our own utility. The other thing that would interest me is the extent to which we become, which has always fascinated me, the extent to which we're loyal to an interface, simply through familiarity. Because again, one of the things classical economists said about the web was, in the early days, they said there will be no customer loyalty on the internet because a cheaper price is always one click away. And actually we seem to be influenced both by, I suppose, trust, which we see as an iterative thing. It builds up every time an Amazon book arrives. We just accord a little bit of extra trust to that. But also just habituation, that using a website that we've used recently and before is just mentally easier or less cognitively burdensome.
Yes, I mean, well, we're going back to economy.
Yep,
the idea that
it's a system one thing at that point. Yeah.
But I think also with Cialdini's work, the stuff that we prefer things that reflect who we are, that are like us, that are similar to us. And so if you look at things like Facebook recommendations, like I know it's quite a binary thing, you can't really have much qualitative input with a like, you just see what your friends are getting into. Stuff like that informs how we then make choices, but then you do have cultural differences and subcultural differences. So for instance, if you look at Hofstede's work, he's a Dutch psychologist who spent 40 years looking at cultural dimensions, kind of like personality but on a countrywide scale. And he found that there were 6 different dimensions that typify traits within a culture, and one of them was uncertainty avoidance. That's the degree to which we'll avoid risk or ambiguity. And you get this with people as well, so people who are more risk averse and risk pro. And with websites that we're familiar with, people who are risk averse will tend to stick with that which is highly rated by their peers, it's familiar, it's got an established credibility offline as well as on. But those who are risk pro will tend to adventure and go off and use things like stumble upon new content, etc. So,
and as my testosterone levels decline to 0 in late middle age, I become actually more avoiding than uncertainty. Does it change with age?
I think we've got a couple of neuroscientists in the room.
Is it something that changes with age, uncertainty avoidance, or openness in a way?
Openness increases with age, I think.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I think.
So the Hofstede thing is there are 6 dimensions, and culturally you will find that different cultures manifest this to an extraordinarily different degree.
Yes, so for instance in the UK we're very uncertainty accepting, which is why I think Tim Berners-Lee was the one who invented the architecture for the internet, because he was able to take risks. If you look at countries that are theocratic or have very strong hierarchies, they tend also to not want to involve themselves in this. And so you end up with a much tighter structure and more limited options.
So unhappiness with ambiguity is a sort of competitive strength in the UK.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. This was the work, by the way, that always told you not to fly Korean Airlines. Do you know this?
Yeah.
It's a social distance where the deference by the co-pilot towards the pilot, because social distance is higher in Korea than anywhere else, meant that the co-pilot would say something like, perhaps you might like to consider your altitude when the guy was heading straight for a mountain, effectively, because the deference culture. The safest one on that basis is Air New Zealand, because they have absolutely no social distance at all. And the stewardess comes in, you go, you're going to crash the fucking plane, man. Okay? So it's just worth knowing, if you want to choose an airline in the future, the social distance leads to higher levels of danger in those situations. But so the uncertainty avoidance, would you say that actually you should factor this in, this cultural factor? Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you create online has to be taken within a global cultural context, because everyone can access it, apart from perhaps if you're in China, where there's certain instances where that may not be true. But if you're attracting an audience which essentially is global, especially for some of the companies in the room, you have to understand that people are going to read your content and the way you present yourself completely differently, and will be sort of adverse to how you do that in certain contexts, and then pro in other contexts. You've got to take a multi-layered view as to who you're targeting, which is kind of why that was quite a difficult book to read to write.
Yes, of course.
Because there's so many elements that you have to consider to mount a really effective strategy.
And do you think the web is becoming less American in a sense, or less Anglo-Saxon, or less English-speaking as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's still only just predominantly English-speaking, which means it's around 51%, which is a dramatic change from where it was 5-10 years ago.
On a few other things, you mentioned social media is emphatically worth mentioning. The Economist recently, actually last Friday, wrote this piece suggesting that one of the reasons why Gen Y, particularly the urban Gen Y, just aren't interested in cars anymore. They don't actually seek status through car ownership, and they see cars almost as a kind of, as a utility, a bit like drainage. And one of their assertions is that this was because actually social media provides them with a new form of social status signaling.
Well, there was a Cisco study from last year, it was 2011, they surveyed, it was a large number of students and young graduates from around the world, and they found that I think it was around something like over 50% said that they wouldn't get involved in a company or take a job with a company who didn't have a social media acceptance strategy in place. If they were not allowed to use social media at work, they wouldn't join. That's a huge thing to hang your career on. And I think that shows the extent to which people are really invested. There's a sense of investment of self-esteem. If I can't have this, then who am I?
With mobiles, it becomes increasingly difficult to restrict, I guess, doesn't it? But I suppose there are two things out there. There's the actual social media yourself, and also what it says about that company. That, it's not a bad little proxy indicator of a slightly boring company. That it compartmentalises things. But you'd say that actually, do you buy that kind of Darwinian signalling thing about social media, that effectively we're signalling those 6 personality types, or the big 5?
Oh, the big 5 personality traits?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think that's all we go on when we're looking for. Are you talking about Darwinian signalling as in make choice?
Yeah. That it's an instinctive thing. I mean, this is Geoffrey Miller, who's obviously a hardcore Darwinian, but that it's some kind of status signaling, I suppose. Is it? I mean, there's an interesting question, which is, of course, should Twitter take advertising? You could argue that Twitter is, of course, lots of people advertising themselves at some level. But can you see that actually changing patterns of consumption, in that experiences, now they become shareable, arguably become almost a greater status indicator than goods?
Yes, I think in some circumstances that's true. What's interesting is that in collectivist cultures, goods, oftentimes, this is one of the research papers, and it's always caveats. So I don't want to generalise, but goods...
Don't worry, in an advertising environment, you don't need actually any sort of, real rigor. I mean, if it's a good story, we'll use it. Carry on.
Academic rigor. But yeah, I think there's a study in China about the new wealthy classes who are able to buy stuff, and because it's quite a collectivist society by some measures, it was talking about keeping up with Joneses and how buying the most expensive bag or whatever is more important than other status signaling behaviours such as being in social media. So I think it depends again on the culture. And also individualist cultures, what am I trying to say? No, so masculine, did you read about masculine and feminine?
I haven't got that bit, because I only got the book early today.
I only got my copy of the photo like 10 o'clock.
No, I was going to say.
Not quite obviously, I've read it too. But Hofstede also distinguished between what he termed masculine and feminine societies. Masculine ones being like in the UK and the West, so quite competitive, goal-oriented, individualistic, we're out, quite capitalistic. and feminine ones that nurture relationships and they look after their weak and the poor. So individualistic and masculine societies are more likely to reflect their status in quantities of followers and the kinds of stuff that they accrue. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's what you mean.
As opposed to more communal relationship-based evaluation in feminine and collective.
So the numbers and the size of social networks will take a different shape. And tell us a bit about the Dunbar number for anybody who doesn't know as well. That's a good one.
So has anyone heard of Robin Dunbar? Psychologist? You have. I studied him at A-level, which was many, many years ago, and he talks about social psychology and relationship building in groups. And he's been dubbed, I think it wasn't actually him that dubbed it, it was someone else, Dunbar's number of 150. It's the idea of the maximum group size of relationships and friendships that we can actually sustain in any meaningful way. And he found that actually this number maps onto our online environments too. So if you look at things like MySpace or Facebook or Twitter, where it's the person who's got, I've got to be careful how you use this, but the person who's got the biggest number of friends, so we quantify, it's like who's got the biggest whatever, that actually is not representative of what we can actually handle in a meaningful way as humans relating to other humans. Did you want to go somewhere?
No, interesting because Twitter has actually started introducing special types of account for people who are kind of celebs. Because they realise that once followers hit a kind of 10,000 level, then just the volume of communication you might get directed at you becomes increasingly difficult. And so they've actually introduced kind of different content management types of account for people who effectively are pop stars and so forth, because the whole thing just became unfeasible. So that's quite interesting. So the amount we can mentally hold in our head in terms of the sort of combination of relationships we can actually deal with kind of peaks, it hits a practical peak at about that. That's interesting. One other thing, fabulous, the power of colour. You can tell us a little bit about that. I think that the different colours affect us again without us being aware of it. Kiva, you gave us a wonderful example. By the way, one of my favourite websites. Anybody here on Kiva? It's effectively micro-lending, so it's charitable lending. And so you lend out money at 0% interest and then re-lend to other people. So what's quite interesting is over a period of years, you realise actually, although you've only lost use of a few $100s of your money, you've actually created sort of a few $1,000s of at least theoretical economic value. It's quite interesting. But that's green for a reason, you think? Green for a reason,
yes. I mean, with colour, this is one of the reasons I got into writing the book, because I was fed up of reading blogs by people saying, oh, red equals this and blue equals this. People like to make things very facile and strip away all the meaning and not really do their research and not cite their papers, which is endlessly infuriating. But with colours, there are two fairly universal colours that do elicit similar reactions, physiologically, psychologically, and emotionally across pretty much all humans. One of them is blue and the other is red. Now, when I was researching this, red is associated with aggression and sexuality. It's also my favourite colour, so I'm not sure what that says about me. And we found that white-handed female gibbons, when they're in their estrus cycles, when they're fertile, basically, they go red in their various areas to signify to the males that they're ready to mate. And women, if you look at historical and anthropological research, have been using red lipstick to make themselves more sexually attractive for millennia. So there's definitely something in it there. Except goths. But even goths will get flushed when they're born.
It'll turn grey.
But the other one was the colour blue. And what's interesting with the colour blue, there was a study done in the States. A lot of the research that's done is done typically by white Western males. You have to, again, contextualise. But in the States, they found that the colour blue and the number 7 were favoured by people in school. And this favouritism seems to have biological roots. The idea, evolutionary psychologists think that it's because in our primitive times, when you're out in the savannah, if you had a good vantage point, you had a lot of blue sky, and then after that, when you move to the sea and whatever, and you have the ability to fish, there's kind of this very physiological, rudimentary association with blue being a good thing. In an online context, blue is really weird because it slows down your perception of time. So if you're pitching if you're placing your website to countries that have slow connection speeds, having a blue website makes them more likely to stick around because they perceive the loading time as faster. And the other thing that wreaks havoc with us in modern society is that the phones and the devices that we use emit blue spectrum light, which actually suppresses your melatonin levels, which means you don't get as much sleep. And it's also been related to certain cancers over a period of time, not to scare people, but if you're not sleeping well, turn your phone off.
There's particular advice against tablets, isn't there? Because you'd think television was just as bad, but the television occupies much less of your field of view than a tablet typically does. So the tablet's actually worse for stopping you sleeping than television or cheese. Another lovely piece, which dates back to something Ogilvy always found and believed, that he always believed that if you wanted someone to read something, you do it as a strip cartoon. And it came first as an observation. His brother worked in Churchill's bunker during the Second World War, and even at the height of the Second World War, the sort of the crisis days of the early 40s, when the newspapers came into Churchill's bunker, everybody turned to the cartoon strips first, even though they arguably had more important things to do. And you had some research that shows that actually depictions of human faces, drawn caricatures of human faces, light up our brains more than photographs.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? Yeah, we think that the more data we've got to go on, it's kind of the classical economical point of view, the more data we've got, the better judgment or decision we can make. That's not true. Cognitive psychologists found that we've got a limited attentional resource, and once you use that up, it makes everything a lot harder to process. And it's the same with faces. If you've got, has anyone ever seen any of Derren Brown's caricatures? No? Okay, so you will check them out, they're really good. But he's got this one of Judi Dench, and I was reading some research around this that showed that people who are shown caricatures versus the original photo of the person they're seeing recognise the caricature first. Their reaction time is stronger because they're kind of hyperbolic features. So you recognise it because it's extreme. And then if you strip away some of the excess data and you just make it black and white, we recognise it even quicker. So it's this weird thing where actually the inverse is true. If you give someone an exaggerated, stripped-down version of a visual image, you respond to it much more viscerally and much more quickly than a natural image. Yeah.
So it's probably that it almost cheats the recognition mechanisms we have by actually and exploits them by doing that. So I always wondered why that was, why they're just so magically readable in a sense. And so that was fascinating. So I finally got some validation that was better than a single anecdote for actually the occasional use of illustration. But a little bit on trust, which is you quoted Benjamin Franklin, who said that to build up a good reputation takes many good deeds, but to lose it just takes one.
Yeah.
That, I suppose, particular relevance there in social media terms, because you can simply have one of those bizarre flame wars that Waitrose briefly saw in the last few days. And that was actually, I'm not sure it did them any harm, to be honest. But is there a risk then that if we've evolved, and we obviously have evolved, there's asymmetry in terms of bad news, good news about people, and we're naturally a little bit suspicious and the slightest bit of evidence of a failure. Is there a danger that in both a mass media age and in a highly connected age, we actually get a disproportionate amount of bad news about brands, institutions, and everything else, and that then erodes our trust more than it should? Or
I think it's not so much the news, I think it's how it's dealt with. I think that's the thing, because people essentially, we want to feel valued, we want to feel like people care about us. And when you're moving into a sphere now where we're holding people accountable and having to be transparent with whatever they're doing to their customers, it's the way that they react to whatever's happened that makes a big difference. So for instance, one of my favourite studies was that of the American Red Cross. Did anyone hear about this? The Getting Slizzard?
Yeah.
Alright, so there was a rogue tweet last year that was sent on Hootsuite, which is a platform that allows loads of people to tweet on behalf of their company in the States. And there was a girl who, it was Friday night, and she got some beers from the microbrewery, Midas Beer, whatever, and she tweeted accidentally through the American Red Cross website or account. And so she said, just got some Midas Touch beer from down the road. When we drink, we do it right. #getting slizzard. She sent this out. The whole Twitterverse went a bit mad. It trended globally, and Red Cross thought, oh shit, what do we do with it? She's gone on Twitter, getting slizzard for the Red Cross. So they decided to act differently to what most people would do, which is kind of clamp down. And they said, well, we've confiscated the keys. Rest assured that the Red Cross is now sober. But they didn't just leave it there, they decided to take it an extra step further, and rather than alienate their fans, because it generated so much publicity already, they decided to mount a campaign with that Midas Touch beer, or whatever it was, to get donations sent to the Red Cross every time someone bought the beer. It was one of the most successful impromptu marketing and donations campaigns ever seen. And that was not because they'd done something wrong, but just because of how they used what had happened in a way that people could relate to at an emotional level. Yeah, so it depends on how you tackle it.
You're a big Twitter fan, aren't you? You confess that. Yeah, I agree completely. Any questions?
Yeah,
we should, shouldn't we? We must do that. Yeah, any more questions? Any questions? Gentlemen? Yes?
I was thinking to ask, where is all this going? I was very struck by the fact that there's a different generation of people in this room, and I have 2 children just now under 20. And I'm really struck by the fact that they think they're so incredibly sophisticated compared to their parents. And I say to them, well, watch out in 20 years, because you might be left behind by something. Do you actually think that's going to happen?
But they'll be left behind.
Yeah.
I think every generation gets left behind.
But in this sphere, I mean, is it still evolving so fast? Or is it in some way slowing down?
I think it depends, because it depends on what seeds already exist for the future trends. One of the things that I think that we're going to see more of is gestural navigation. So we're going to move away from screens, and or at least away from physically interacting with the screen, more to spatial interaction. So things like heard of Connect and things like that, where you actually just move. That's gonna happen organically, but because you've got the iPhone where kids are already, my godson's not even 1 yet, and every time he sees a screen, he tries to swipe on it. So there's this idea that gestural expression will affect an action in that virtual environment. So I think certain things like that, where the seeds are being sown, it's just an evolution of that behaviour.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the page swipe on the iPhone is actually it's kind of analogous to changing the page on a book.
Yeah.
So it does have its origins in the real world, I suppose.
And I think as technology advances, we're going to go more and more intuitive with that. So it's just going to be an extension of how we already interact with our environments. So it may be that actually the kids are not the ones who are left behind, it's the adults who suddenly go, all right, I know what this is like because I did it when I was, I don't know. It's hard to tell.
No question, I saw. Lady Ray.
Yeah. I was just interested to know how important you think digital personalisation is around with online persuasion. So I know digital personalisation is a big topic in the area which I work in. But how important do you think it is that people feel they're being communicated to personally on the internet in terms of influencing their choice?
It depends, I think, is the answer. Again, on culture, it depends on what kind of culture you're targeting, and then also what kind of people you're targeting within a certain environment. So with Gen Y, sort of digital natives, I think personalisation is really important because that's what they've come to expect. With people who are a bit older, who can remember what it's like to not have internet, I was 16 when I started using the internet, so I'm just on that cusp. I don't want to be over-personalised too. I don't want it to be that my choices are so limited and dictated by someone else because they've read my personality type. It's a bit kind of to be saying that having written the book, but there is that distrust of having my options narrowed by something that's predetermined.
An assumptive.
Yeah, an assumptive one. Whereas the internet originally was designed to affect, to go with the opposite of that, which is kind of open source, let's let everyone connect. So I think it depends on the generation, the context, and the culture. Mm-hmm. But the trend is definitely going that way, and it's only a matter of time before those cultures who are more collectivist will sort of start shifting in that direction. Should we take one last one?
Yeah, the lady here. Yes, of course.
How democratised is society going to be as you move into the future? And obviously, we're talking about online here a lot. Is there going to be a growing rift between people who do and don't have access to online facilities, between rich and poor, between digitally privileged and digitally disadvantaged, let's say? You know, is there going to be a case where people who can't get online aren't marketed the best brands or aren't given the services that other people can access to?
I suppose it's a question of devices and infrastructure to an extent, because if you look somewhere like Africa, one of the, I can't remember which area it was now, there's a study that, there's some news around this application that we made for mobile banking called M-Pesa, which the West have been trying to do for ages and we just didn't manage to get our fingers out.
It's owned by Vodafone, isn't it?
I think it is now,
yeah.
Yeah. And they actually developed it in Africa because of the needs of those people who were there, and it's become wildly successful. The idea being that people have access to certain types of devices, but they still have access to the infrastructure. So it's about meeting people's needs. So I think it's not so much will people have access, but how will people use that access to benefit their own societies. I don't think there's going to be necessarily a divide. It's just the way that we expect it.
Yes, I'm a bit mixed about the digital divide, because first of all, what I don't want to see is people being hectored to go online who simply don't want to. I mean, it's worth remembering that there's a large percentage of the population in any culture who, by dint of age or taste or whatever, are just quite incurious. There's nothing right, you lead a perfectly happy life that way. Occasionally when I hear talk about that sort of digital divide, you almost get the impression of sort of bullying grandparents into, changing their mode of behaviour in a way they don't want. But if you look at certain age groups, you see that penetration is, pretty close to 100%. The means of getting there. I mean, EasyJet went very interesting also, which is do you have it at home and can you use it? In that EasyJet for about 8 years has had 97% of its bookings online. So now that's actually, although it's a low-cost airline, it tends to be a fairly middle-class practice flying on those airlines. So I'm not saying it's representative of the whole population, but it suggests that a lot of people can actually find someone to do it for them, if the stakes are enough. But it is also an interesting question. It may be one of those questions which actually becomes irrelevant in 20 years, and also, not all technology needs to be. You can have technology which uses the internet, which isn't particularly explicit about it. There's a whole debate really about whether technology. This is often called the Philips versus Sony debate. Should technology become more and more visible, the Sony believes, with more norms, more dials? And the Philips belief is actually you can use technology to make devices simpler. So it is an interesting. It's a very important question. But we'll actually segue me, and we'll have one more question after this, into the interesting discussion around price, because there's a section of the book quite rightly about the psychology of pricing. Now, neoclassical economics probably destroyed a huge amount of potential research in this area, because it just assumed that actually the cheaper something was, the more people liked it. And even that most basic assumption that your price demand curve goes one way, just the number 9, for example, you can tell us about that. I think it's one.
So you all know about the number 9 equals kind of sales. If you see $3.99, it's pretty clear that it's not £4, and we know about it, but nonetheless we still respond to it. Well, there's some research done in the States that term these types of numbers, ending in 9 and 5s, also as charm prices. The idea being that if you add a sale, if you create a sale item that's got the number 9 on the end or the number 5 on the end, people naturally assume that it's cheaper. So something like, I can't remember the exact stats from the book, but something like if you had a dress that was £60 flat, and you had one that was $64.99, you'd actually sell more if they were $64.99 than if it was 60. So it's this kind of idea that we're really warped in our sense of the value.
It's a pretty important finding, by the way, isn't it? If you think of the number of businesses who have sweated their guts out to bring the price down, possibly as a result of which actually reducing demand for their product, it's a pretty sad testament to the effect of classical economics on a lot of business behaviour, I think. And one more question, I think, or two more. Go on, Jez?
Amazon seems to be the beacon of all things persuasive online. And we've heard it quoted a few times before. Kiva was kind of a little bit aware of that. Had a look at that site and could see what they're doing. If there was a top 3 apart from those two, where should we look to see who these great persuaders are in the online environment to try?
In terms of sales?
Just in terms of persuasion, so getting you to do things.
So the limited sales sites that you're getting now, it's kind of the last 2 years you've seen a rise of these things. There's things like Ashika, Delani.
Scarcity bias.
Yeah, that whole thing. So it's like sign up to exclusively get Voyage Privé or whatever, or like the secret break thing. And you've got to become a member, so it's exclusive. So if you're I'm getting a special deal. And then once you're in there, it's a limited time and it's a limited product. So they say, oh, it's scarcity. So you've only got 3 hours to buy, and there's only 2 items left. Oh my God, I've got to do it, otherwise my life will fall apart.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, it's not conscious as that, but it's that sort of.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's really where it's at. And then, auctioning sites as well that use that.
Another boring thing I say to all our clients is that Amazon Prime is an idea that you can take into more or less any category. That you pay a bit more up front as a commitment device, but in return, you actually get something extra, in this case free next day postage, every time you buy. It's a brilliant kind of loyalty exchange and device, which I think can apply to categories far beyond this. We do have the final terror, which is of course individual pricing, where you basically calculate how rich someone is and quote a price accordingly. There are a few hotel sites in the US which claim they don't actually increase the price when someone arrives at the site on a Safari browser, but they do show Safari browser users, who are map users basically, more expensive hotels. Because they're wealthier, stroke, pretentious arseholes, depending on your where you stand on the platform there. But if the whole thing breaks down, if you think about it, where rich people have to get poor people to do their shopping for them in order to get a decent deal, then you have a kind of absurdity, because to a great extent we see price as a proxy for quality at some level. And we assume when we see a price that that's the price that's being quoted to everybody. And so there is a huge potential ethical disaster around this.
About dynamic pricing.
Dynamic pricing, yeah, particularly at an individual level. I think interestingly, there's a level to which you can get people to accept yield management pricing, and that if the rules are very clear as an airline, which is the earlier you book, the less you pay. If you think about it, 20 years ago, if you were on a plane and you discovered the person next to you had paid less for their ticket than you had, you would have blamed the airline, and now you kind of blame yourself. Because you understand the rules and you should have booked earlier, and it's sort of accepted, I think.
It's about being transparent.
But it's transparently done, and but the second that then becomes individualised, you've got a real problem. Because obviously, a loyalty, any good Tesco club card database could very, very quickly tell you how price sensitive an individual is. So there's some interesting debates going to happen.
Should we move to the panel?
Yeah, of course. What a good idea. Absolutely fantastic.
We can get off on this. Promote necessarily what I do, but it's to provoke a conversation around online influence, behaviour, how we relate, how it affects us online. And for that, there has to be a community discussion around what different people are doing in different areas, which is why I invited the panel. And I'm going to chair this. I'm not actually going to contribute. I'm just going to help guide. And so I think what I'd like to do is start off, if we can just have a brief introduction from each person. So I'm sure you'll be much better at introducing yourself than I can do. And then we're going to have probably a definition of what you think online influence is, or how you can influence people online based on your respective specialities. Yeah? So, Yarden.
Okay. So my name is Yarden Yaroshevski. I'm founder and CEO of a startup called Stikipixels. We call ourselves a games agency, and we focus on developing games for brands as sort of persuasion and communication medium. The term gamification gets thrown around. We actually hate it, but we could probably cover this later.
Okay. And what do you think influencing people online covers in your area during gaming?
I think games, first of all, it's an entertainment medium, so it's much about telling a story like you would in film. One of the problems we have with games is that many game designers are very good at designing games, but they don't know how to, we don't know actually how to communicate things in games. So people will come up with a game idea because it's cool or they want to play it, and that goes sports very well. But if you want to tell somebody, let's do a game about nourishment, then there's also issues of lateral or literal mediums and stuff like that.
Thank you.
I'm Sam Amsterdam. I'm the head and founder of Amsterdam Group Public Relations, with a forte in social media. I'm also the head of online communication for BGR Group in Washington and London. I do online marketing, traditional media relations, but my forte is social media engagement. And I do this both in the private and public sector. And it's all about empowerment. It's all about getting the CEO of a multinational corporation or a political candidate to be on the same level online as a constituent or consumer.
And so what do you find works best in terms of getting people to be influenced online by those heads of companies, CEOs, etc.?
I think it's about controlled transparency and promoting a finger on the pulse of timely issues, showing to the online community that you care, that you're interested in, that you express a willingness to engage. And I think that speaks, it resonates throughout the internet. I think that can actually draw the kind of traditional media attention that you're looking to accomplish.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fabian Stelzer. I'm the co-founder of iQuant. We're a neuroscience meets advertising company. We specialize in the tiny aspect at the very beginning of the persuasion process, which is attention. As most of you will know, attention is not a sufficient condition to persuade someone, but it's a necessary one. So you can't have someone's mind share without having someone's attention first. And the way we tackle this problem is we do a lot of research, neuroscientific research, in particular on visual attention, and we build computational models of human attention that are able to predict how people look at specific stimuli. So it's essentially a sort of replacement for eye tracking that delivers instant results with a fairly high accuracy. And yeah.
Cool, thanks, William.
I'm Karen. I'm a director at the Future Foundation, which is a consumer trends and insight specialist. I guess we kind of embody what Rory was saying earlier. We take vast amounts of data and we try to understand the theory that goes alongside it. So we have our own data and we aggregate data from external sources. I guess what makes our lives interesting is to understand that in this context, the fact that influence kind of is the blood that flows through the veins of a lot of the trends that we look at. We've been tracking trends since 1996. So our remit is very much about understanding brands and companies to understand how the data and what we're seeing in consumer behaviour can be distilled down and applied to their business.
Cool. So that gives you an introduction to who these people are and what they do and why they're interesting. Everything that you've described here is about getting an understanding about how we can influence people's behaviours. I'd quite like to throw out there, is it actually ethical to try and influence people's behaviours? Are there certain contexts in which it becomes more or less ethical, and what do we do about transparency? Do we tell people how we're influencing them? So I'm going to throw that out and see which one of you wants to take the bait first.
Well, I'm at the edge, so yeah, I think I'm not sure about behavior change. I think it's a big term. I think in our domain at least, it's about persuasion or changing perceptions, perhaps. I think if a brand produces a game, obviously it has to be upfront, and it is upfront. So you do a game, the first thing that comes up is the logo. Having said that, I think at least the games medium, one thing we do know is that it has to be a proper game. You can't really have any products in it. It has to function first of all as an independent game and compete in that particular ecosystem. I think games can be really helpful in changing people's perception about all sorts of things. There's a really interesting case with Subaru in the US in the 90s. Back in the 90s, they weren't really selling Subaru at all. There was like one dealership for the whole country, nobody's heard of it. Then Gran Turismo came out, very successful racing game on PlayStation. And Subaru was one of the coolest cars there, and it just shot their sales by 2,500%. They're now pretty big, just based on those people kind of playing the game and then kind of going back to the agency. That's maybe a very simple example.
If I can add, I think it's not so much about persuasion as it is, you're winning hearts and minds by providing them with opportunity, real-time opportunity. And an example I'll use is the Mitt Romney campaign. They use mobile apps, which is another genre of social media engagement, to provide their constituents and prospective voters with an opportunity to learn who's going to be the vice presidential candidate Mitt Romney first. We live in this pop culture dynamic, especially in U.S. politics, and everyone was on, waiting with, bated breath to see who was going to be the vice presidential nominee after the Sarah Palin pick of John McCain in the Republican Party in 2008. And so, not only were you to want to find out who was going to be Mitt Romney's pick, you couldn't just download the app and sign up. You'd have to give your zip code, your email address, and full name, and in fact your address. And what you do subtly is register for their subscription list, for their RSS feed, and you receive these updates from the Mitt Romney campaign. And it had an unprecedented, it generated an unprecedented amount of feedback from the online community, and in fact, it was one of the most popular apps of the week at that time. And there are thousands upon thousands of apps that are developed on a monthly basis. But it really had them compete at the Obama level in the social media genre with regard to political engagement. It showed that Mitt's team had a finger on the pulse of what was happening in social media engagement on a day-to-day basis, and it turned out very well. The app was very successful.
If I may, I would argue there's a lot less manipulation these days than there was ever before. Because obviously, with online marketing, Google, and the internet, the way people, let's say we look at an app or a website, the way people come to your website is mostly because they were searching for it, or oftentimes they know exactly what they want in the very beginning, and when it then comes to convincing them to ultimately purchase a product on your website, it's more like pushing them over the edge. But usually, in general, the whole process has been inverted to some extent.
So you think that perhaps the user is more in control, and then the role of persuasion is just to kind of gently nudge people to make that final choice?
Well, at the very least, don't make it difficult for them, right? Which is still fairly standard. Most websites get their traffic organically from Google, and not necessarily because people scan something on the subway. These people came there for a reason. They searched for it. They had the intent, even though that may have been placed by a campaign, of course. But it's for the first time in history that consumers are actually a lot more in charge than they ever used to be.
I've got two thoughts. First of all, influence isn't new. It's really obvious, but influence has been around for as long as we have. The online medium might be new, but the fact that we're talking to each other, telling each other our thoughts, our recommendations, our beliefs, isn't new. I mean, we've got data that shows that people's taking advice from experts has shot up, and people saying that they're happy to take advice from friends and family remains very high. So you've got this idea that we're all influencing each other. The relationship with brands might be getting more complicated. The relationship with organisations and online's kind of muddying the water even more, but influence isn't new. And the other idea, which is exactly what you were saying, is a trend that we call consumer capital, which is about how consumers are becoming much more savvy and aware of the value of the information that they hold. So, for example, in this instance, personal data, the information that Google may store about you once you've been using sites for a various amount of time. Consumers are starting to understand that there's a value that can be attached to that. It's a commodity. And we're seeing more and more consumers moving towards this idea that they're willing to trade that for more personalised deals, for things that will give them an added something, whether that's social capital or whether that's a good that they may not have before.
And do you think with that point, the idea that we're... I read a quote that was basically, you're not paying for a service, you're paying in your information, your data, and that's much more valuable. How do you start to quantify that value, especially as Facebook users, for instance, using Facebook as a gateway platform to access other platforms such as Spotify? It's positioned itself in such a way as to trade specifically in value. Is there a place to educating people about how valuable it is, so that the influence conversation ends up flipping back to the consumer, saying, actually, you're free to influence these companies by choosing how you use your data? Are we at that point yet?
Probably not, because I think it's a really abstract concept how much your personal data is worth. But savvy brands are already starting to do things like give exclusive deals to super fans and to people who like a Facebook page. I'm seeing quite a lot of interesting stuff with exclusivity. I saw a mustard brand called Grey Poupon the other day that had done some strange algorithm on its Facebook page where you could only follow it if they deemed you to have good taste. And I thought that was an interesting, a really good idea. And I thought it was a really interesting way to give consumers a little peek into how their lives and the way that they live their lives can be of value to their relationship with the brand.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on that point? No? Yes?
Well, I just think it's cutting in between. It also dabbles in a bit of advertising in that sense. I mean, Great Pie has always had this advertising reputation of class, and this exudes it in a very organic, grassroots way and allows for a bit of interactivity. And that's something that you're always looking for if you're a brand that feels you may have a certain disconnect with your prospective consumer.
I think I want to take you. Sorry, please, yeah.
Of course, this question varies again culturally a lot. I mean, if you look at how people use Facebook in Germany, where they're much more concerned about their privacy, and most Facebook profiles are locked down, so you can't see what people post unless you friend them, which I believe to be different in the States, for instance, which is much more open. And so again, this is a tricky question because you will have different answers for different cultures.
I was just in Berlin last weekend for a GfK conference, and one of the people who was there, his name was Marcel, I forget his surname, he's created this platform called QIY, which aims to be kind of have an aggregating platform that gives the user back all their data that all the companies across the world have accrued from their databases. So it would literally be a platform where you can log in, you say, right, what has Barclays Bank got in terms of my data? How can I view this? How can I use this? Or what has Topshop got in terms of the data that it's tracked on my purchases or whatever? And it's it was a really interesting debate that stemmed off the back of this presentation based on culture. So some of us who are presenting, there's one from Hamburg, one from America, obviously from the UK, and most of the GfK participants were from Germany. And there was a really clear divide on the ethics of this and the idea that, well, this third party, the German line, essentially, it was quite a consensus. They said, well, if we give this third party our access to all our information, they have access. It's a Big Brother type style platform. Whereas my response was, well, wouldn't it be great to have ownership of my data? And they don't necessarily own it, they just deliver it. And there was a really clear divide, literally across country borders, as to how this could or could not be harmful, etc.
It was actually a very interesting startup a couple of years ago that fairly quickly died because it was just too innovative. It was started by Seth Goldstein in New York called Root Markets, and the idea was to provide people with an attention recorder, so that would record their clickstream online. That was before Facebook got big. So, and people would be able to sell their clickstream directly to marketers. Maybe we will see something like that in the future, who knows, once people understand that their data is of value and they can make money with it. So they were going to use it for lead generation, obviously failed when it came to acquire users for such a product, but I think it was an interesting glimpse into a potential sort of future of that.
Just to throw a stat in, a piece of research that we did said that more than 40% of people see their personal data as an asset, and 90% would rather have more control over their data and exercise it in the way that they choose. And I could be really mean and throw it over to my colleague Josh, because he actually did this report. Have you got anything to add to that, especially on the different cultures?
Well, I think what I would add is that EU regulation of parts of the world, data protection regulation, are going to force industry's hand in some way. So new European Union regulation, which is likely going to force in 2016, and you're right to say that Germans are traditionally more data protection conscious. They've been written by a German Green MEP, so it's not a good sign for industry. But these new regulations, if passed, would allow consumers to, one, request all data that businesses have on them, and two, have a right to be forgotten, in which they can ask for more information to be deleted. It would also move towards a opt-in model, where businesses and brands have to incentivize the sharing of data. So if this is passed, and I think it will be passed in 2016, then this will change the whole ballgame of data exchange, empower consumers in quite dramatic ways.
Yeah. I mean, that's a massive shift. Can we take a couple of wildcard comments or questions from the floor of the panel? No? Come on, we've got some amazing brains up here.
It's not a comment at the moment, it's something completely different. But somebody gave me their business card the other day and it said their name, seller, and then afterwards, instead of putting their telephone number and their landline number and their email address, it just said Google me. That was it. Name, Google me. And it really struck me how many campaigns ads have we seen that says go to something slash this, or even something pretty basic, but it's always go to, rather than Google Dove, Google Ford, Google whatever the name of your campaign is that might be quite meaningful to people. Are we continually treating the internet like we know and can control where people are going and using it, when actually everybody uses search? Google is our portal to everything. And should we be just spending an awful lot more on search engine optimization? That was my question.
Interesting that you say search engine optimization. With the whole idea of personalization, Google is becoming quite prescriptive in what it does and doesn't show us. There are other alternative engines that people in the digital and tech industry are starting to use because it doesn't play to that method. It's basically you do a search and you get all the results, and it's very labor intensive. There are also certain, I did this the other day just to see how it would affect my user journey throughout all these different websites. I cleared all my cookies. You can do stuff like that where you just, and it took about an hour to clear all the cookies off my Mac, which is just ridiculous. I mean, it's a fast machine. I think it's a question of choice. Like, do people actually want to use Google and get given stuff because it's easy? You know, we're talking about attention. How much time and effort do we actually want to spend interacting with the brands that we want to give us stuff? And how much do you want it spoon-fed by cookies, tracking my behaviour, my personality, giving me something that's perfect for me? I don't know. What does anyone else think on the panel?
I would hope that that person's business card specialized in search engine optimization, because that's fantastic. But I'd say
find out.
Exactly. No, I'd say that's a I consider Google and the first 2 pages of Google to be Main Street. And if you're a market, you want to be on Main Street. You want to be able to have yourself appear on those first few pages. And be you a politician or a brand, you want to appear in their crosshairs, maybe when they're not looking for you. And so I think that SEO is a very hot commodity these days, and there are a number of tactics to increase your ranking on search engines. But Google is to Google something, it's to if you have a runny nose, you need to use Kleenex. More often than not, you don't use tissue paper. It's the go-to, and I think it's SEO will continue to be a service that will be attractive for a number of years.
I don't know anything about SEO rather, but what I do know is that I think what brands can sometimes go wrong with is, or they think that there's a huge difference between behaviour online and offline. And for consumers there isn't. They just want to look something up. It doesn't really matter how they do it or where they do it, they just kind of seamlessly move from one platform to another. And so I like the idea of just saying Google me, because that is probably what consumers would do.
But I mean, there's a certain element of this compare the market, compare the meerkat campaign. So the story goes, and I'm not well versed in it, but that market is a very compare is a very expensive search term, but market isn't. So draw all your attention to the fact that you'll compare the market rather than compare the insurance rate or compare all of these other factors. If you get the market and people are actually looking for that, is that the story? So
when people search for compare, they immediately were competing against Go Compare. And so the bid prices were getting ridiculous. So they realised that if you could get people to put the word market in, or meerkat, a perfectly acceptable compromise, then again, the origin of the idea was about search engine optimization and nothing else.
And actually, have you checked out the meerkat site?
Yeah.
It's really good. I spent about 30 minutes on that when it came out. Awful. And they've now created a whole brand of them. You can get the little figurines and stuff in. Any more questions?
Just to build on that, if you look at the investment into search on a PPC basis and on SEO basis, it's all gone into optimization to improve ranking. What opportunity do you think there is to develop some of the persuasion tactics into the advertising and the copy that sits in the ranking? Because our observation is that it's not done very well at all.
Sorry, I have a question for you. What do you mean by it's not doing very well at all?
So if you look at the ad copy that's written on maybe £3 billion worth of advertising, is written by people that aren't copywriters.
So it means that the people writing it are not doing very well because they're not versed in tactics.
Of online persuasion.
And if they were, then Google wouldn't actually pick it up?
If they were, then people were more likely to click because they'd be more persuaded, and then the quality score of the ad would go up.
But isn't a talk towards a move towards the semantic web, where it's much more driven by kind of like user interaction and the way that you ask a question, and it's much more intuitive. I think that will be the future of this. I don't know how. But
It was kind of a leading question because we've got a behavioural economics product which has got copywriters that are versed in online persuasion techniques that are now starting to write copy on websites or authority and messenger, and we think there's a lot of power in that seems to be a big area that just hasn't been capitalised on by
effectively it was a huge media budget, with the creative budget being get somebody who's got 10 minutes to spare to write this stuff, because that was as much skill that went into it. It was bizarre.
So what are your thoughts?
Yes, if I can just add in a different perspective, obviously search and Google works very well when you know what you're looking for, like insurance. But if you look, for example, entertainment, you don't go into Google and type, boy meets girl movie and expect to find stuff. So, for example, on the App Store, we see, there's 700,000 things there. Most of them are games, for example. How do people discover things? The current structure is actually very difficult because there's only kind of top 25 where people actually look. Very hard to discover things. The new iOS 6, they've actually revised the algorithm, so it's now much more weighted towards engagement and kind of social discovery. So if your friends are playing something, you're more likely to see that. And I think we just have to make a separation between looking for things where we know you're looking for it and looking for things that we don't know what you want to find.
News being the obvious case where you obviously can't look for something you don't know is happening.
Yeah. Just write something about Iran.
Should we take one more question and then go for drinks and mingle and chat? Oh, there's 3 more questions. Are you guys falling asleep? You're right for 3 more questions. Grinning, but there is wine and there are canapes. Okay, so 3 more questions. 3 gentlemen holding up their hands, please.
If I'm starting a new brand from scratch, it's an online brand, I'd just like to ask you, each of you, what you think the one most important thing I need to do in order to turn that into an influential brand as quickly as possible.
I would say, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I would say if you want to build a brand, I don't know what the product is, the first thing is to build a brand, to engage with people, to get them to know you. And there's a difference between recognizing your logo and, in theory, spending hours really interacting with things. Games could be pretty good for that. And also there's a gameplay, by the way. So, for example, one of the kind of projects we're looking at is actually social network-ish kind of thing. So they have all the CPC, they have all the kind of online conversion, they have all the regular things. But if you think about it, signing up to social network is a big investment. If you're sitting bored somewhere, you have to actually type your name and put password and all that stuff. And obviously a lot of people fall off and it's hard to convert. So one of the things we're looking at is actually introducing a step in between. So don't sign up to a social network, but spend time in our game, which helps you, very craftily kind of view the people who use the social network differently or kind of get more familiar. And from there, we kind of lead you to the sign up, and in theory, they could kind of convert better by just adding kind of a stepping stone. So I would actually focus on engagement. This is the important thing about a brand, not clicks on Google, I think.
I agree. It's a tremendously booming industry. I would certainly suggest a compelling logo, an attractive URL. If whatever the brand may be, if you can secure a URL that's unique to whatever you're doing, that'd be fantastic. Secure relevant URLs, point them to your domain. You want to capitalize on. Even if you're not to engage on Facebook or Twitter, you want to still build the account that is relevant to your URL. You want to captain the market online, and you want to. If you can, if you're into proactively engaging, you're willing to disclose even controlled degree of transparency, that will resonate a long way, and that will actually assist in traditional journalist due diligence when they're looking up your brand. It will actually ease their search, and that's always. I have a few friends in the journalist community. That's always a perk for them. And so I think it's about owning your brand. You have to own it online. You have to appear. When users are searching the issues or topics related to your brand, not necessarily when they're looking for you directly.
I would say the number one thing if you're launching a consumer brand is to focus on what you do pre-launch, because once you've launched officially and you have a website, you are a brand. And despite all the things that we can talk about, usually people don't like to interact with brands. But they much prefer to interact with an idea or a person. So before you've launched your brand officially, in particular if it's like a grassroots sort of thing, there are various ways to engage with a potential target audience in the community in different forums, and in some sense build a community around that idea that then gets launched together with this community. Which we can talk about this later for drinks. There are a couple of interesting case studies here, but so this would be my number one advice: don't focus on launch, but what you do before launch.
I think that there's a really interesting trend towards moving away from, on a brand level, away from a transactional relationship with a consumer. So it's not just about, I have something to sell, you have something you wish to buy, let us approach it that way. I think that the borders are being blurred a bit, and brands are becoming much more about creating commonalities with the consumer, the person that they're talking to. So an example I was talking about earlier was Burberry World. They've created this big flagship store in Regent Street, and their remit is very much their vision. It's very much not about come and buy some clothes from us, but about come into the world of Burberry, come and experience who we are and what we do. And they almost see the sale as quite far down the line in the relationship. It's more about inviting them into the community, inviting them to become part of the brand, to become brand ambassadors in a way, but also to, you know, take the relationship from the store to online very seamlessly. And I think there's a move towards brands doing that, moving away from this transactional relationship towards something a little bit more emotive and emotionally based.
Is it kind of enlistment pre-purchase rather than asking for advocacy post-purchase?
Yeah, it's like, why would you even doubt the fact that someone would write constantly about Burberry if they've been part of the journey with you along the way? And the Burberry store is absolutely huge, actually impressive, very, very personalised. So you can go in, and I think they've got smart tags so that you can actually scan a tag and see a video screen of it being worn on the catwalk, and you know, different wardrobe combinations and stuff. It's all tailored around the user experience rather than about going to shop, buying something, leaving again. It's extending the relationship way beyond what it used to be.
I think, because that was quite a long answer, would you be happy for us to field other questions over a glass of wine and some food? Because I think you look like you're flagging, like you do with a glass of wine. So I'd like to thank our panel. Thank you, Rory. Thanks, Ogilvy, for hosting us. Grab a book at the back. Jez gave me a pen in case you do want me to sign it. I'd be happy to. And then we're going to get herded over to Boysdale because it's a bit tricky to find. So I'm going to have wine and canapes.